He laughed before he even finished his sentence. "Let's see if the cleaning lady can handle a real weapon," General Richard Collins said, smirking as he turned toward the group of young soldiers standing beside him at the shooting range. They laughed because he laughed. That's how it worked at Fort Carson. When the general made a joke, everyone else followed even when it wasn't funny, especially when it wasn't. The woman standing a few yards away said nothing. Her name was Marianne Lewis, 46 years old, black, quiet, and invisible to nearly everyone on that base. Her grey janitor uniform looked too thin for the cold wind cutting across the training field. She had her mop bucket parked beside her, a rag hanging from one hand. She wasn't supposed to be there that day. Her assignment was to clean the mess hall and check the bathrooms before noon. But the general had spotted her walking by, and in his arrogance he saw something funny in the idea of mocking her. "Come on, sweetheart," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "Ever fired anything other than a cleaning spray?" The laughter grew louder. Marianne didn't move, didn't flinch. She looked at him the way someone looks at a storm they've seen 1,000 times before. Slowly she set the rag down, her voice calm, quiet, unshaken. "I fired a few things, sir." That made the laughter grow even more. A few soldiers nudged each other, grinning. One whispered, "Oh, this'll be good." The instructor at the range looked uncomfortable. "Sir, maybe we shouldn't—" Collins waved him off. "Relax, it's just for fun." He turned back to her. "Tell you what, you beat me, I'll give you the rest of the day off. You lose, you clean this range for a week." The soldiers roared. Marianne just nodded. "Deal!" The general grinned, expecting fear, expecting her to back down. But her expression didn't change. She walked to the firing line, rolling up her sleeves with slow precision. The instructor handed her an M9 pistol. She checked the chamber, tested the grip, adjusted her stance. It was the kind of movement that came from memory, not luck, but the men around her didn't see that. They only saw a janitor holding a gun. Collins fired first. 3 quick shots. The rounds hit near the center, close enough to draw a round of applause. He stepped back, smug, soaking in the sound of it. Then Marianne stepped forward. The air went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She took a slow inhale, exhale, lifted the pistol, and fired 5 shots in a clean, controlled rhythm. When the smoke cleared, the target was motionless, except for a faint ripple from the last bullet's impact. 5 holes, 1 perfect group. Dead center, no one spoke. Not a single laugh remained. The instructor blinked, stepped closer, and then called out almost in disbelief, 5 bullseyes. Grouping under an inch, the general's smirk faltered. He forced a grin, his voice cracking slightly. "Well, I'll be damned. Beginner's luck." Marianne lowered the gun, handed it back carefully. Her voice was steady as a blade. "Luck doesn't shoot that straight, sir." The soldiers stared, first at her, then at the target, then at him. Collins's jaw tightened. "You're dismissed." "Yes, sir." She turned, picked up a rag, and walked away without another word. Behind her, silence followed like a shadow. That night, a private uploaded the video to a group chat. "You won't believe this," he typed. Within hours, the clip spread through the base like wildfire. By morning, it had a caption, "Cleaning up the range, one general at a time." By noon, everyone had seen it. By sunset, everyone was talking about it. But for Marianne, it wasn't about the laughs or the looks. She went home, took off her shoes by the door, and sat alone at the kitchen table beside a framed photograph of her late husband, Sergeant David Lewis, smiling in his uniform. She placed her hand gently on the glass. "Guess I still remember how to breathe, huh?" she whispered. Outside, thunder rolled over the mountains. A storm was coming, but this time she wasn't the one who'd get wet. The cafeteria at Fort Carson buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Trays clattering, boots stomping, voices bouncing off the cold metal walls. Soldiers laughed about missions and promotions, trading stories of victory and valor. And through all that noise, Marianne Lewis moved like she was invisible. Her mop glided across the tiles in slow, practiced arcs. Every motion was quiet, deliberate, a rhythm she had mastered over 6 years of being seen but never noticed. She had once been the kind of woman who filled rooms with laughter, But life and loss had taught her to find peace in silence. Silence was safer. Silence didn't get you punished, but that morning, silence felt heavier than usual. The whispers started near the coffee machine. Two corporals, heads bent together, snickering like schoolboys. "You see that video?" one said. The other grinned. The general's still fuming. "You'd think a janitor out shooting him was a war crime." Marianne pretended not to hear, wringing out her mop, but they weren't whispering quietly enough. Across the room, General Richard Collins entered, his uniform sharp, his boots polished to a mirror. Conversation stilled immediately, not out of respect but fear. Collins didn't earn loyalty. He demanded it. He spotted Marianne almost instantly. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing into that familiar look, the kind that came from men who couldn't stand being embarrassed by someone they thought beneath them. He walked over slowly, each step deliberate. The room fell silent again. "Morning, ma'am," he said. His tone was polite on the surface, but beneath it was acid. "How's the floor looking today?" "Spotless, I hope." Marianne straightened her back, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "Always, sir," he smirked. "Glad to see you're sticking to what you're good at." A few soldiers snorted quietly. The sound was small, but it was enough. Enough to draw blood. Marianne said nothing. She dipped her mop back into the bucket, her movements calm, mechanical. But Collins wasn't finished. "You know, I've been thinking," he continued, voice rising so the whole room could hear. "Maybe we should start a new tradition. Let the janitors teach marksmanship." Laughter erupted around him. Marianne paused mid-swipe. She could feel the eyes on her, waiting to see if she'd react. Waiting to see if the woman who had silenced a room full of soldiers with 5 perfect shots would finally speak. But she didn't. She looked down at the floor, cleaned the last streak of dirt, and said softly, "I'm just here to do my job." "Sir." For a brief second, something flickered in Collins' expression. Irritation, maybe even guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Good answer," he muttered, turning on his heel. The soldiers resumed their laughter as he left, but it was forced now, uneasy, because they had seen what she could do. They had seen her strength, her control, and deep down they respected her, even if none of them dared to say it. Marianne finished her shift quietly, as always. But when she stepped outside into the thin Colorado sunlight, her hands trembled. Not from fear, from restraint. She sat on the bench outside the mess hall, the cold metal biting into her palms. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, like her husband had taught her years ago. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Control the shot. Control yourself. Inside her pocket she carried a small worn coin, her husband's unit challenge coin. She rubbed its edges, grounding herself in its smooth surface. She wasn't going to break. Not now. Not for a man like him. That night, when she got home, she poured herself a cup of tea and turned on the local news. Her phone buzzed. Another notification. Someone had uploaded the video again, this time on a national veterans forum. The headline read, "General humiliated by janitor in shooting challenge. Watch her precision." The comments were relentless. "She's a badass. That's what humility looks like. Maybe she should be training him." Marianne turned off the phone. She wasn't interested in fame. She wanted peace. But peace wasn't coming, not with men like Collins in power. The next morning, she arrived at work early. The air was thick, tense. Something had shifted in the base's rhythm. The stairs were longer, the whispers sharper. And when she walked into the staff room, her locker was open, its contents dumped onto the floor. Her lunch crushed, her thermos dented. Pinned to the door was a note in thick black marker. "Know your place." She stared at it for a long time. The words didn't hurt, not really. She'd heard worse. But it told her one thing clearly. Collins wasn't done. She folded the note neatly, put it in her pocket, and began picking up her things. Someone wanted her to quit. But Marianne Lewis had survived worse storms than this, and this time she wasn't cleaning up someone else's mess. She was waiting for the truth to do it for her. By sunrise, the entire base had seen the video. Phones buzzed in every barracks. Soldiers whispered over breakfast, pretending not to look up when General Collins walked through the mess hall. The man who'd spent years commanding respect now drew nervous smirks and muffled laughter. He knew. He could feel it. The moment he stepped into a room, the air changed. They used to salute him with confidence. Now their hands trembled, trying not to grin. The caption under the video didn't help. Cleaning up the range, one general at a time. That was all it took to burn through decades of image and power. Collins's rage boiled quietly at first, beneath his forced smiles and crisp commands. But every time he heard her name whispered, every time he caught a soldier scrolling through that clip, something dark inside him grew heavier, and that's when he decided to make her pay. Marianne didn't know it yet, but the next few weeks would test every ounce of strength she had. Her first warning came on a Monday morning. Her time card was missing. When she asked about it, the clerk shrugged. "General's orders. You're under reassignment. Said you'd be working in the old motor pool." The motor pool was the worst post on base. Dark, dusty, freezing cold in winter, scorching hot in summer. It wasn't a coincidence. Still, she said nothing. The next week she arrived to find her mop and supplies gone. "Inventory issue," they told her. "We'll get replacements soon." 2 days later, her locker was gone too. Someone had scratched "Shoot a Girl" across it before it disappeared, but Marianne didn't break. She showed up every day, early, calm, quiet, sweeping with borrowed tools, cleaning the grease-stained concrete floors no one else wanted to touch. Because dignity, she told herself, isn't something they can take. It's something you decide to keep. One afternoon, as she was scrubbing near the hangar doors, she heard footsteps behind her. "Still here, huh?" a familiar voice drawled. She turned. Collins stood there, arms crossed, his uniform crisp, his eyes sharp as glass. "Yes, sir," she replied evenly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You embarrassed me in front of my men." Her jaw tightened, but her tone stayed steady. "I didn't embarrass you, sir." "You challenged me," he smiled thinly. "You think that makes you special?" "No, sir. It just makes me honest." The words hit him harder than a bullet. For a brief moment something flickered in his face. Shame, maybe, but it quickly turned to anger. "Enjoy the motor pool," he said coldly. "Might be the last post you ever get here." Then he turned and left. Marianne watched him go, her heart pounding but her face calm. She had learned long ago that silence could be louder than shouting. 2 days later, 2 MPs came to find her. "Miss Lewis," one said awkwardly, "you've been placed under administrative review. Something about improper use of military equipment." Marianne blinked. "What equipment?" "The firearm. The one from the range." Her stomach dropped. So this was his next move. The officer sighed. "We don't think it'll amount to anything. Everyone saw he invited you. But protocol is protocol." "Of course," she said quietly. Protocol. That night she walked home slower than usual. The wind was biting, slicing through her thin jacket. Her reflection followed her in the dark windows. Tired eyes, streaks of grey in her hair, but still that same unbroken calm. When she got home, she placed her keys on the table beside her husband's photograph. "I'm fine," she whispered, even though her voice cracked. "He won't win." She sat for hours, replaying the moment on the range, the calm before the shot, the breath before the trigger. In through the nose, out through the mouth. If she could control that moment, she could control this one too. The next morning, the entire base seemed to be watching her. Some looked at her with pity, others with quiet respect. And a few, the ones loyal to Collins, smirked when she passed, whispering things like, "Knows her place now." When she clocked in, the clerk avoided her eyes. "Sorry, Miss Lewis," he muttered. "Command says you're suspended pending review. Effective immediately." She stood there in silence. Then she reached for her ID, unpinned it, and placed it gently on the counter. "Thank you," she said softly, and she walked out, slow, steady, unbroken. Outside the gates, the sky was grey and heavy. Snow started to fall, small flakes at first, then thicker ones, covering the ground in white. She looked up, closed her eyes, and breathed in the cold air. "Let him dig his own grave," she whispered, because she knew the truth about storms. They always clear the air, and when they do, everyone sees who was standing in the rain the whole time. The first snow of winter still blanketed the ground when the storm truly hit. Not the kind that fell from the sky, but the kind that spread through screens and whispers and headlines. Someone, no one knew who, had leaked the video outside the base. Maybe it was a private tired of watching injustice. Maybe it was fate. Either way, by Tuesday morning the world had seen it. It started small, a post on a veterans forum. General Mock's Janitor learns the hard way, then Reddit, then Twitter, then Facebook by noon. Millions of people were watching Marianne Lewis, that quiet black woman in a grey uniform, outshoot a decorated general without breaking a sweat. The comments poured in like a flood. She's a hero. That's grace under fire, and promote her. Within 24 hours, the base media line was ringing non-stop. Within 48, the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office had issued a no comment. And by the end of the week, reporters were camped outside Fort Carson's front gate, waiting for anyone to speak her name. Meanwhile, Marianne sat in her small kitchen, staring at her old phone lighting up with messages from strangers. One caught her eye. From Private Evans, the young soldier who'd filmed the video. "Ma'am, I'm sorry they treated you that way. We all saw what he did. You didn't deserve any of it." She read it twice, then typed slowly. "Thank you, son. I'm fine. The truth's doing the work now." She set the phone down and looked out the window. The snow glowed orange under the streetlight. Everything was quiet except for the faint hum of the wind. She wasn't a woman who believed in revenge, but she believed in justice, the quiet, patient kind that didn't need witnesses. Inside the general's office, it was chaos. A stack of reports cluttered his desk, internal memos, media requests, complaint notices. Every few minutes, another call came in. "Sir," his aide stammered, "the Inspector General's office wants a briefing about the incident. They're saying there's talk of discrimination." Collins slammed the phone down. There was no discrimination. It was a joke, but even as he said it, he could hear the doubt in his own voice. He turned to the television mounted on the wall. A news anchor's voice echoed through the room. "The video of a black janitor outshooting a commanding general continues to spark national debate about race, respect, and power within military ranks." Collins muted it, pacing like a caged animal. His hands shook. His perfect uniform felt like armor cracking at the seams. "Who leaked it?" he growled. No one answered, because everyone knew. It didn't matter anymore. The truth had escaped, and truth never went quietly back in its cage. 2 days later, Marianne got a letter in the mail. From U.S. Army Office of Professional Responsibility. She opened it slowly. "Miss Lewis, we are conducting a formal inquiry into General Collins's conduct following your suspension. We'd appreciate your cooperation in providing testimony." For the first time in weeks, Marianne allowed herself a small smile. She dressed carefully that morning. Pressed uniform, polished shoes, hair tied neatly. When she walked through the base gates again, people stared, but not with mockery this time. With respect, with quiet awe. Even the guards nodded slightly as she passed. Inside the briefing room, the air was tense. 3 officers sat at a long table. A recorder clicked on. "Miss Lewis," the investigator began, "can you describe your interactions with General Collins leading up to your suspension?" Her hands rested calmly on the table. "He challenged me publicly, sir. I accepted. I didn't mean to embarrass him. I just didn't want to be disrespected." The man across from her nodded slowly. "Did he retaliate after that incident?" "Yes, sir. My hours were cut. My supplies were removed. I was reassigned to unsafe conditions, and when that didn't push me out, he filed a false complaint." Her voice didn't waver. No anger, no tears, just truth. When she finished, the room was silent. The lead investigator leaned forward, lowering his pen. "Miss Lewis, he said. "What you did at that kind of composure, it's rare. You should know you've got a lot of people watching, and not just here." She nodded politely. "I'm not here to be watched, sir, just heard." Outside, as she left the building, a group of soldiers stood waiting by the gate. Evans among them. They didn't speak. They just saluted her, all of them. For a moment Marianne froze. No one had ever saluted her before. Then she smiled, nodded once, and kept walking. The wind carried her hair back as sunlight broke through the clouds. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, honest, and full of power, the kind of moment that doesn't trend, the kind that changes people instead. That night, Collins got another call, this time from Washington. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and final. "General Collins, your leadership conduct has been called into question. You'll be temporarily relieved pending investigation." For the first time in years, Richard Collins didn't have anything to say. He just stared at the black screen. After the call ended, the echo of his own arrogance ringing in his ears. And somewhere, across town, a woman who never raised her voice was finally being heard. When the letter from Washington arrived, the seal alone told the story. It wasn't thick or dramatic, just a single-page memo stamped "confidential." Inside, the words were precise, formal, and deadly. "General Richard Collins, effective immediately. You are relieved of command pending review for misconduct, abuse of authority, and professional ethics violations." He read it twice, then a third time, as if the ink might change. It didn't. For years, his voice had commanded hundreds. His orders carried the weight of law. But now, the silence of his office was louder than any salute he'd ever received. On the wall hung his framed commendations, shining, perfect, meaningless. Each one now felt like a relic of a man he'd pretended to be. He swept them off the desk in one violent motion. The glass shattered across the floor. "Sir!" His aide called from the hall. "Get out!" The door slammed, leaving him alone with the wreckage. For the first time in his career, General Richard Collins felt powerless. Across town, Marianne stood at her kitchen window, watching the sunrise spill across the horizon. Her phone vibrated. Another message from Private Evans. "Ma'am, they pulled him. Word is, it's over." Marianne didn't answer right away. She just looked down at her hands. Hands that had cleaned floors, carried pain, and still managed to steady a weapon better than any man's pride. She set the phone down gently and whispered, "No, son. It's just beginning," because she understood something Collins never had. Power wasn't what you took from people. It was what you gave. By midweek, the story had hit national news. General suspended after viral video exposes discrimination at Fort Carson. Talk shows debated it. Editorials called it a moment of reckoning. Reporters wanted to find Marianne, to get her side, to turn her into a symbol. But she refused every interview. She wasn't interested in fame. She wanted truth and peace. Still, people kept showing up. At the grocery store, outside the base gates, strangers stopped her just to say thank you. She never knew what to say back. One afternoon she received a call from the Pentagon. "Miss Lewis?" the voice said. "This is Colonel Hayes with the Department of Defense. We'd like to meet with you in Washington. There's something we'd like to discuss about ethics and leadership training programs." Marianne hesitated. "Sir, I'm not military personnel." "That's exactly why we want you," he said. "You've shown more discipline than most of our ranks." She smiled faintly. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. We'll handle travel." When she hung up, she stared at her reflection in the window. For the first time, she allowed herself to see what others saw: strength, grace, and something deeper: integrity. In Washington, the air was thick with tension and politics. The Pentagon's corridors gleamed like polished armor. Marianne walked them quietly, her simple clothes out of place among uniforms and badges. But she didn't shrink. When she entered the conference room, several officers turned in surprise. At the head of the table sat Brigadier General Andrews, known for his bluntness. "Miss Lewis," he said, standing to greet her. "You've caused quite a stir." She nodded politely. "That wasn't my intention, sir." "I know," he said, smiling slightly. That's what makes it powerful. He gestured to a chair. We've reviewed the reports. Collins is being discharged, but we're not here to talk about him. We're here to talk about you. She frowned slightly. Me? Andrews leaned forward. We're launching a new initiative, Project Resolve. It's about ethical leadership and inclusion. We'd like you to be part of it. Civilian Leadership Division. The room went quiet as the words sank in. Marianne folded her hands. Sir, I clean floors, he smiled. No, ma'am. You taught half the country what leadership looks like. That night, in her hotel room overlooking the city, Marianne sat by the window with a cup of tea. The lights of Washington glimmered like stars, reflected in glass. Somewhere down those streets, men in power argued, postured, and tried to shape the world with words. She had done it with silence. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her husband's old coin, the one she carried every day. Her thumb brushed the worn edges. Guess you were right, David, she whispered. You don't need rank to have purpose. A knock sounded on her door, a courier delivering an envelope. Inside, her official letter of appointment. At the bottom, one line caught her breath. Your voice matters, Miss Lewis. Lead by example. She folded it carefully, placed it beside the coin, and looked out the window again. The night was quiet. The city slept. And somewhere far away, a man who once mocked her lay awake, haunted by the echo of 5 perfect shots. The invitation came folded inside a crisp white envelope. No signature, no fanfare, just a simple embossed seal of the U.S. Army and 5 quiet words. We would be honored to have you. When Marianne opened it, she read it twice, then a third time, letting the weight of those words sink in. It had been 6 months since the investigation, since the storm that had shaken the walls of Fort Carson. 6 months since the name General Richard Collins had vanished from every sign, document and directory on base, and now they wanted her to come back. As she packed her small overnight bag, she caught her reflection in the mirror, older, wiser, and softer somehow. There were faint lines near her eyes now, not from age but from endurance. Strength had carved them there. She whispered to herself, not as the janitor this time. When she arrived, the base looked different. Not physically, the same rows of barracks, the same cracked pavement, but the air felt changed, lighter, cleaner. The young soldiers at the gate snapped to attention the moment she stepped out of the car. Ma'am, welcome back to Fort Carson, one said. His tone held the kind of respect that couldn't be ordered, only earned. She nodded, smiling. Thank you, son. As she walked across the courtyard, heads turned. Conversations paused. Men and women who once passed her without notice now stepped aside. Some saluted, some simply stared, unsure how to bridge the gap between who she was and who she had become. Inside the auditorium, banners hung from the ceiling. Integrity, leadership, honor. The words shimmered in gold letters against dark fabric. She stood behind the curtain for a moment, listening to the low hum of the crowd. There were over 300 people there, officers, recruits, civilians. Cameras lined the back wall, and then she heard her name. Please welcome Miss Marianne Lewis, Civilian Advisor for Project Resolve. The applause began slowly, polite, restrained, then grew. It wasn't the wild, empty clapping given to those in power. It was the kind that came from hearts that understood what they were witnessing. She stepped onto the stage, her grey suit modest but elegant, her posture straight. The microphone waited silently. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but every syllable carried. I used to walk these halls invisible, she began. People saw the mop in my hand before they ever saw the woman holding it. A murmur rippled through the audience. I was mocked. I was underestimated. But I never stopped doing my job because I knew who I was. Respect doesn't come from rank. It comes from how you treat the people you think don't matter. Silence filled the room. You could hear the hum of the lights, the faint rustle of a sleeve. We talk about leadership, she continued, but real leadership isn't about being followed. It's about what you leave behind when no one's watching. That's the test. That's character. Her voice broke slightly then, not from weakness but emotion. There was a time I thought silence was my only defense. But silence, when it's grounded in truth, can be the loudest voice of all. When she finished, the room rose as one. Applause thundered through the hall. A few officers wiped their eyes. The colonel, who had once looked the other way, now stood with his head bowed. Marianne smiled, small, humble, then stepped back, letting the moment belong not to her, but to what she represented. After the ceremony, she walked alone down the corridor toward the firing range. It looked almost the same wooden tables, the same smell of oil and gunpowder. But at the far end, mounted on a polished plaque, she saw something new, a small bronze plate, engraved with words that made her throat tighten. In honor of Marianne Lewis, integrity in every shot. She reached out and touched it gently, tracing the letters with her fingertips. And beside the plaque hung the target, 5 holes in one perfect circle, preserved, framed, eternal. "Guess you made your mark," a voice said softly behind her. She turned to see Private Evans standing at the doorway, now wearing a sergeant's stripe. She smiled. "Looks like we both did," he nodded. "You taught us something we'll never forget." She looked back at the target, her reflection shimmering in the glass. "It was never about teaching," she said quietly. "It was about reminding people that truth doesn't miss." They stood there for a moment in silence, 2 generations of strength and change. As she walked back toward the gate, the wind picked up, scattering dust and sunlight together like gold in the air. She stopped once more, looking out over the field, the base stretching wide before her. For years this place had been her cage. Now it was her proof. The day after the ceremony, the base was quiet. The morning sun stretched long and golden across the mountains, painting everything in shades of redemption. Marianne Lewis walked alone along the narrow road that led to the firing range. The wind brushed through her hair, carrying with it the faint scent of gunpowder and memory. The base was just waking up. Soldiers jogging in formation, a drill sergeant barking orders in the distance, but she didn't hear any of it. Her steps were slow, deliberate. Every crunch of gravel beneath her boots was a reminder of how far she had come. 6 years ago, she had walked these same grounds unseen, a woman with a mop and a quiet heart, cleaning up after men who thought her invisible. Now those same grounds carried her name. When she reached the range, she stopped. The air was still. There it was, the plaque. Bronze, polished, gleaming under the light. In honor of Marianne Lewis, integrity in every shot. Beside it hung the old target, encased in glass, the 5 perfect holes still visible. The circle that had changed everything. She traced the outline of the plaque with her fingertips, her reflection faint in the metal. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her husband's medal, the same one she had carried through every storm, through every humiliation, every long, lonely night. She held it tightly for a moment, then knelt and placed it gently at the base of the plaque. "For you, David," she whispered. "We both made it." A single tear slipped down her cheek, not of sadness but of release. She stood up slowly, her back straight, her shoulders square. The wind picked up again, lifting the edges of her jacket, and for a brief second it felt like he was there, standing beside her, smiling that same proud, steady smile. Later that day, she met with the commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, for a final debrief before leaving for Washington again. "Miss Lewis," he said, standing as she entered, "I wanted to thank you, not just for what you did, but for what you've become to everyone here." She smiled softly. "I just told the truth, sir," he nodded. "That's the hardest thing to do in this place. You've changed the way people think. You've changed me." He extended his hand. "You always have a place here." She shook it. "Thank you, Colonel. But I think my work here's done." When she stepped outside, the sunlight hit her face full on. She paused for a moment, closing her eyes, letting it warm her. For the first time in years, she felt light, like the burden she'd carried had finally been set down where it belonged. Before she left the base, she stopped by the motor pool, the same grimy building where Collins had once reassigned her to humiliate her. It looked the same, cold, oil-stained, and echoing. But now, a new sign hung above the door, Maintenance and Training Center, operated by Marianne Lewis Leadership Fellows. She smiled, a deep, satisfied smile. The very place meant to break her had become the foundation for others to rise. Inside, a group of young soldiers, both men and women, were cleaning and fixing old equipment. They looked up when she entered. "Ma'am," one said, standing quickly. "We've heard so much about you." She raised a hand gently. "No, son. You'll hear enough from me in the program." They laughed and she grinned. It felt right. Full circle. That evening she drove toward the highway, the mountains glowing red in the setting sun. The base shrank in her rearview mirror, the symbol of everything she'd endured and overcome. At a stoplight, she caught her reflection, the lines of strength in her face, the calm in her eyes. For the first time, she didn't see a janitor. She didn't see a victim. She saw a survivor, a leader, a woman who had faced the system and won without raising her voice. When she finally reached the overlook outside town, she parked and stepped out. The valley spread below her like a sea of light. She took one last deep breath, slow, steady, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the same way her husband had taught her before his final tour. The same way she had centered herself that morning on the range. She whispered into the wind, "You don't win by shouting. You win by standing still until the truth catches up." And then she smiled, turning back toward her car. The sky was turning gold and crimson, the color of endings and beginnings. They laughed because they thought rank meant power. They mocked her because she was quiet. But silence, that was her weapon. She didn't shout. She didn't fight. She stood, and when the dust settled, the truth stood with her. In a world that salutes medals but forgets humility, she reminded them that respect isn't worn on a uniform. It's carried in your heart. She didn't win by revenge. She won by dignity, and in the end, the walls that once ignored her echoed her name, because no matter how unfair life seems, no matter how long it takes, truth never misses, and justice always finds its way.